On a quiet Tuesday night, Claire reached across the nightstand to check the time, and her fingers brushed her husband's phone. Jasper. He had forgotten it in the bedroom. The light from his study was still visible under the door. The screen was already lit. A voice note was playing, left on record by accident, the little red dot still blinking in the dark. She almost set it back down. Almost. The voice coming through the speaker was low and deliberate. The voice of a man speaking freely. The way people only speak when they are absolutely certain no one is listening. It was Jasper. And he was talking to a woman named Tracy Simmons. Her husband was not talking about leaving her. He was talking about making sure she was no longer around, killed, so that he and Tracy could disappear with every cent of her inheritance. The accounts, the properties, everything transfers once it's done. We disappear, no trail, just us and the money. Claire set the phone back down, exactly where she found it. She walked to the bathroom, turned the shower on, and sat fully clothed on the floor of the tub until the water ran ice cold. One hand pressed over her mouth the entire time so she would not make a single sound. When she finally stood up, she looked at herself in the mirror. Mascara streaked, clothes soaked, eyes wide, and said one thing to the woman staring back at her. Not today, not ever. She did not sleep that night, but she did not panic either. Jasper came to bed sometime after midnight. She heard the study door, the soft click of the light, his footsteps in the hall. She closed her eyes before he reached the bedroom. He slid in beside her, pulled the covers up, and was asleep within minutes. She lay perfectly still, listening to him breathe. Claire Peterson was the kind of woman who made every room feel a little warmer just by walking into it. She was 34, the director of operations at Maplewood General Hospital, the person everyone called when something went wrong, the one who stayed late without being asked, the one who remembered every nurse's birthday and every patient's name. She was brilliant, deeply kind, and she gave everything she had to the people she loved without ever thinking twice about it. She had a good home, a stable life, and a husband she trusted completely. His name was Jasper Holt. Smooth-talking, well-dressed, always had the right thing to say. On the outside, he looked like a man who had it all together. On the inside, he had been quietly becoming someone else entirely, and Claire had absolutely no idea. 6 weeks before the night that changed everything, Claire's mother had passed away after a short illness. It was the kind of grief that hollows you out from the inside. And in the middle of that grief, she inherited everything her mother had left behind. A multi-million-dollar estate, properties, bank accounts, all of it transferred completely into her name. She had leaned on Jasper through every single day of it. She believed he was holding her up. She had no idea he was doing the math. A few hours after she heard that voice note, she was on the phone with her attorney, Preston Clark. She spoke for 22 minutes, kept her voice completely steady, and by the time she hung up, the first step was already in motion. The next morning, she hired Ray Harmon, one of the most respected private investigators in the country, 20 years of federal work behind him, the kind of man surprised by nothing. He listened to everything Claire told him, nodded once, and said, "Give me 3 weeks." So for 21 days, Claire Peterson performed the hardest role of her life. She cooked Jasper's favorite meals. She laughed at his jokes. She kissed him goodnight and lay beside him in the dark, eyes wide open. One Thursday evening, she made his favorite. She set the table, lit the candles, poured his wine, He reached across and squeezed her hand and said, "You're incredible, you know that?" She smiled and said, "I know." And inside, there was nothing, not pain, not rage, just this strange, cold, absolute silence. Like a part of her had already left the room and was watching from somewhere far away. She refilled his glass. She smiled again. That was the hardest thing she had ever done in her life. While she sat across dinner tables from the man who was, planning her death, Ray's team was pulling everything apart. Secret bank accounts, a trail of messages between Jasper and Tracy mapping out every detail. The date, the method, the name of the third party hired to make it look like an accident. Every piece documented, every recording authenticated. On day 21, Claire signed her name at the bottom of the cooperation documents, stepped back, and let the FBI take it from there. A few hours later, they moved in on Jasper and Tracy at the house. Claire was 3 miles away in a federal field office, a cup of tea going cold in her hands, watching a live feed on a laptop screen. Jasper and Tracy walked through the front door together, unhurried, easy, like two people who had nothing in the world to worry about. They were inside for less than 90 seconds. Then the doors opened again. 14 agents, every corner covered. No room for confusion about what was happening. Tracy screamed, the kind of scream that comes from shock, not fear. From a person who truly did not believe this day would come. Jasper went completely still. He did not fight it. He did not run. He just stood there as they read the charges. And you could watch it happen in real time. The color leaving his face. The front going out of him. The calculations he had been running in his head for months. Collapsing all at once into nothing. He turned slowly and looked directly into one of the cameras. At the field office, Claire set down her cup of tea. She breathed in slowly through her nose. She breathed out. It was over. Jasper received 22 years. Tracy received 14. On sentencing morning, Claire sat in the courtroom in pale ivory, still, composed, hands folded, and neither of them could hold her gaze. She closed her eyes, exhaled slowly, and let it go. In the holding facility afterward, Jasper sat with his face buried in both hands. He thought about Claire's laugh, the way she always gave him the best portion of whatever she cooked, the way she used to rest her head on his shoulder on Sunday mornings and tell him she was the luckiest woman alive. He had looked her in the eyes every single day, knowing what he was planning. And now, in the silence of that cell, with 22 years stretching out before him, the full weight of what he had destroyed came crashing down all at once. "I had everything," he whispered to no one. "She was everything, the most extraordinary woman alive, sitting across from me every morning, loving me completely. And I threw her away for greed, for nothing. I will spend every single year of this sentence understanding that. Every night, every waking moment behind these walls. And it will never be enough." He pressed both hands harder over his face and wept. Not the dramatic kind of tears, but the quiet, broken kind that come when a man finally understands exactly what he has done. In a separate room, Tracy sat in silence as the full truth settled over her. The moment they had separated her from Jasper, every story she had told herself simply collapsed. And I will live with what I almost helped him do to that woman for the rest of my life. She had written a letter to Claire 14 times and never sent one. She suspected no words existed that could ever be enough. A few weeks later, the divorce was granted quickly and entirely in her favor. She walked out of the courthouse on a bright Thursday, stood alone on the steps for a moment, and breathed in the strange, enormous feeling of being finally free. The weeks that followed were not easy. There were nights she could not sleep, not because she missed Jasper, but because she grieved the marriage she had believed she had. The years she had poured into someone who was quietly plotting her end. Grief is strange like that. You don't always mourn the person. Sometimes you mourn the story you told yourself about them. One evening, about a month after the divorce, she was sitting at her kitchen table, just her and a mug of tea and the quiet. And she realized she had not laughed, not really laughed, in longer than she could remember. So she called her friend Mara, who made her laugh until her stomach hurt about absolutely nothing important. And when she hung up the phone, she sat there in the quiet for a moment and thought, there it is. There I am. She went back to work. She started running in the early mornings. She cooked her mother's recipes again, called her friends back, laughed at things that were actually funny. Little by little, she came back to herself. Not the version of herself that had existed inside that marriage, but the real one. The one who had always been there underneath. About 6 months after the divorce, on a quiet Saturday with nowhere particular to be, Claire stopped at a place she had driven past dozens of times. Harbor Light, a residential home for motherless children just at the edge of town. She had always meant to stop. That morning, she finally did. She walked through the front gate with 2 fruit baskets and a box of children's books and a heart full of love that had nowhere left to go. She was barely inside when she noticed the car. Parked along the street, completely out of place on that modest road, was a sleek, obsidian black car that turned heads without trying. And stepping out of it, holding the small hand of a little boy, was a man who made her stop walking entirely. Tall, broad-shouldered, simply dressed in a way that looked completely effortless. Dark eyes that carried something she recognized immediately. Grief, held quietly, for a long time. His name was Elias Donovan, 40 years old, CEO of the Donovan Group, one of the largest companies on the continent. The kind of name that appeared in business headlines and on the sides of buildings. But standing there on that quiet street with a sleepy little boy holding his hand, he looked nothing like any of that. He looked like a man who had learned to carry something heavy and had simply never put it down. 2 years earlier, he had lost his wife, Camille, to a sudden illness that gave no warning and no farewell. He had been raising their son alone ever since, running a billion-dollar company by day and reading bedtime stories at night, holding everything together through sheer love and willpower. The little boy's name was Owen. He was 7 years old, quiet and watchful in the way children become when the world has already shown them it can take things without asking. But when Owen saw Claire, something in him simply moved. He let go of his father's hand, walked straight across the path toward her with the unshakable certainty of a child who has recognized something he cannot name. Then he wrapped both arms around her waist, pressed his face into her side, and held on. Not a polite hug. The desperate anchoring hold of a little boy who had found something he had been missing for 2 whole years and was not willing to let go. Claire's fruit baskets nearly slipped from her hands. She stood still for a long moment. Then slowly she wrapped both arms around him and held him right back. Elias stood a few feet away. His jaw tightened. He turned his face to one side. It didn't help. The tears came anyway. He stepped closer, voice low. "I'm so sorry. He's not normally." "Please don't apologize," Claire said softly. "Not for this." He looked at her for a moment, just a beat too long. Then he nodded and looked away. They ended up sitting together in the waiting area while the staff prepared, and they talked for over 2 hours. Owen stayed pressed against Claire's side the whole time, one small hand wrapped around her fingers, the matter apparently settled as far as he was concerned. Elias told her he had come to begin an adoption process, that Owen had been asking for a sister in his quiet, persistent way, and that grief had taught him one thing above all else: don't wait for ready. Claire smiled at that. She understood it in her bones. She told him enough of her own story, that she had survived something she never saw coming, that she was still healing, that she had come here that morning because she had love in her chest with nowhere to go. He listened the way certain people listen, like the rest of the room had stopped existing. When the staff returned to say the process would take several weeks, neither of them looked particularly disappointed about the wait. As they stood to leave, Owen looked up at Claire with absolute 7-year-old seriousness. "You have to come to our house. I need to show you my train set." Elias glanced at her, like corner of his mouth lifting just slightly. "Just for a little while," Claire said. It was not just for a little while. In the weeks that followed, they kept finding reasons to be around each other. Elias would bring Owen to visit, and then stay long after Owen fell asleep on the couch with a toy train still in his hand. He and Claire would sit at her kitchen table with mugs of tea and talk, really talk, the way two people do when they have both been through enough to know that small talk is a waste of good time. He made her laugh. She made him think. And slowly, without either of them naming it, something was growing in that kitchen that neither of them had expected to feel again. One evening, he took her to a neighborhood restaurant. Nothing fancy. They were there for 3 hours, and the food went cold on both plates because neither of them noticed. He walked her to her car, and they stood in the quiet street, and neither of them made any move to leave. "Same time next week?" he asked. She smiled and said yes. The following week, he showed up at her door with her favorite flowers. She had never told him what they were. "How did you know?" she asked. He looked almost embarrassed. "I pay attention." She looked at him for a moment, this man who showed up quietly, who listened without an agenda, who had been paying attention to her in the small ways that matter most. Then she stepped aside and let him in. A few evenings later, she cooked for him, one of her mother's recipes, the kind that takes all afternoon. He sat at her kitchen counter, watching her move around, and they talked the whole time, laughing, easy, comfortable in the way that only happens with someone who already feels like home. When she set the plate in front of him, he took one bite and went completely quiet. "Elias? Give me a second," he said. "I just need a second." She laughed, open and unguarded, and he looked up at her like it was a sound he wanted to keep. A few weeks later, he drove her home from dinner, and they stood at her front door, talking well past midnight, neither of them willing to be the one to end the night. She looked up at him. He was already looking at her. He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair from her face. Slowly, carefully, like she was something rare he was afraid to disturb. "Claire." "I know," she said quietly. He kissed her the way a man kisses a woman when he has been holding back for weeks, tender and deliberate, both hands framing her face. She leaned into him, his arms wrapped around her, and for one long, still moment, they stayed just like that, foreheads together, the whole street quiet around them. She drove home that night with a smile she genuinely could not put down. About a month after that, on a Thursday evening, Claire was in Owen's room finishing a bedtime story. He was already half asleep, curled under his blanket, his small chest rising and falling slowly. She closed the book quietly and stood to leave. And from somewhere half in a dream, Owen murmured, "Good night, Claire, Mama." Just like that, casual and certain, like he had always said it. Claire stood in the doorway for a full 10 seconds without moving. She made it to the hallway before she fell apart. Both hands pressed over her heart, tears coming fast and warm, the kind that are not sad at all. The kind that come when something you didn't even know you were hoping for just quietly lands in your hands. She had survived the worst thing that had ever happened to her. And somehow, on the other side of it, she had found this. A few months later, in early spring, Elias drove her to the waterfront on a calm evening. Owen fell asleep in the back seat within 10 minutes, wrapped in his favorite blanket, completely at peace with the world. Elias parked along the water. The city glittered in the distance. The air was cool and still. He turned to face her, reached into his jacket pocket, and then he got out of the car, walked around to her side, opened the door, and knelt. No speech prepared, no performance, just steady eyes and a heart he was finally ready to give. "I would go to the moon and back for you. I would build a road there if that's what it took. You are the answer to a prayer I didn't even know I was praying. I have watched you love my son as though he was always yours. I have watched you put yourself back together with a kind of quiet strength I didn't know existed. And I know, with everything in me, that I want to spend the rest of my life standing beside you. Will you let me love you? For good? For always?" She said yes before he finished. From the back seat, Owen stirred, looked through the window, and pumped his tiny fist in the air. They married a few months later, small and intimate, just the people who mattered, with Owen standing beside his father in a little fitted suit, beaming so hard that every guest in the room reached for a tissue. 3 weeks after the wedding, the adoption was approved. They brought home Sophie, bright-eyed, sharp, curious, 5 years old, and full of the quiet hope of a child who has not yet given up on the world. The day she arrived, Owen was waiting at the door holding a drawing, 4 stick figures under a yellow sun, names written in careful, uneven letters. He held it out without saying anything. Sophie studied it. "Is that me?" Owen nodded seriously. "That's your spot. I saved it." She looked at the drawing one more time. Then she hugged him. And just like that, without any ceremony at all, the family was whole. Owen grew into the most devoted, playful big brother, always saving Sophie the window seat, always first to hold her hand on a hard day, full of a warmth that everyone around him could feel. Sophie blossomed, sharp, funny, fiercer than anyone expected. She fit into the Donovan household like she had always been the missing piece. Claire was promoted to CEO of the Maplewood General Hospital Network. Elias restructured his schedule to be home more. Together, they launched the Camille Donovan Foundation, dedicated to maternal health and support for families navigating sudden loss. On Saturday mornings, all 4 of them ran together, Elias and Claire side by side, Owen sprinting ahead, Sophie insisting she was the fastest and occasionally proving it. In the evenings, they cooked together, badly and happily, and ate around a table that was always a little too loud and never quite tidy, and absolutely, completely the center of everything. This was not making do. This was not moving on. This was the real thing, deeper and truer than anything that had come before it, built by two people who knew exactly what the ground felt like when it disappeared and had chosen each other anyway. If you are walking through something painful right now, if someone you trusted has taken your love and used it against you, please hear this. Your story is not over. The chapter you are in is not the last one. There is life on the other side of this. Real, full life, not a lesser version of what you lost, but something deeper and truer, built on a foundation that cannot be shaken. Claire Peterson lost everything she thought she had. And on the other side of all of it, she found a love that would go to the moon and back. A little boy who called her mama before anyone asked him to, and a daughter whose spot had been saved all along. Protect your peace. Trust yourself. Do the quiet, brave, daily work of healing. And stay open. Because sometimes the most extraordinary chapters of your life begin in the most unexpected waiting rooms. If you enjoyed this love story, please like, comment, and subscribe to see more heartfelt tales. Your support helps us continue creating the stories that make your heart race.